Yes, I'm Derek Foxton. I've lived nearly all my life in Hereford, but I was born in Lincolnshire on a remote RAF station, still well known today as RAF Cranwell. In 1939, when I was born, they had a hospital there, and war had already broken out. Father was not allowed to go to where mother lived, so she was given her train ticket before I was born to go to live in Cranwell, and I was born in the RAF Cranwell Hospital. And soon after that, we located back to Hereford, where they were renting a house in Putson, and after the war they purchased the house and went to school in Hereford, then London University to study dentistry, and then I decided I wanted to emigrate after graduating. I was at home one day, had a visitor friend, Derek Evans. He said, "I've got a friend that wants some help." This question, what help does he want? Oh, he's a dentist. He's going to fight the local parliamentary election as a Liberal candidate. And I said, well, I'm applying to go abroad. And he said, well, it's only for a few months. Do you want to meet him? So I did. And I worked in a very sort of temporary surgery in a spare room, very basic, to see the first few extra patients that he couldn't deal with because his business was expanding. And as soon as he started to take up the reins to fight the election, he left the whole business in my hands. I had only recently graduated, and I was in at the deep end with the help of his nursing staff, and his name was Ken Vorse, this dentist, by the way, so people in Hereford probably remember the name. He would pop in occasionally, sort out any problems, which amazingly were few and far between. And after the election, the end result was he failed to get in. So he said, "Do you want to stay temporarily?" And I said, well, yes, until I've got a job that give me full-time employment. And this temporary surgery I stayed in, and within a short time it became a full-time job. And the arrangement was that I could leave as soon as I'd found something in a place I wanted to go to. And then out of the blue, after about 6 months I was still there, he said, I've got a parliamentary electoral position to fight in, I think it was Oxted, Surrey, as a Liberal potential candidate. And he said, do you want to buy the business? I said, I haven't got any money. And I said, well, we'll sort that out. Anyway, cut the long story short, he went, I purchased the business, and I was on my own in Hereford, in at the deep end, running a business with a dental technician, nursing staff and reception. And that's the start of me being resident in Hereford.
Right.
Still living at home, annoying parents, etc.
Thanks, Derek. But I wonder if you can just tell me, when did you first pick up a camera?
Probably when I was about 5. This would be towards the end of the war. Film was not readily accessible. I think, if I remember, it was leftover film from an RAF base. And at the end of the war, there were a lot of materials left around and being thrown away. And we started playing around with the camera. Getting the films processed at that time, I remember complaints from the family how expensive it was. I had to take it into the chemist to get them printed. And taking photographs was very sporadic until I was about 10 or 11. And I taught myself how to develop the black and white negative film, and then print contact prints, and then you soon want to do more. I wanted an enlarger. Couldn't afford one, obviously, so I made one. And my contact in photography then was a dear gentleman in a business called Photographic. And they had a shop in Broad Street, next door to the City Library and Museum. And the proprietor was Godfrey Davis. He used to find me outdated film to use, and I could buy that with my pocket money. I could buy the chemicals because they're quite cheap to develop and print, contact prints. And then when I wanted to make an enlarger, to make enlargements, I had to make my own enlarger. He provided me with a broken plate camera, and the rest was all do-it-yourself. A big tin to put the light bulb in. The camera basically had everything you wanted, a plate camera, to put glass slides in and out so you could put your negatives in, and a wooden post and a wooden base for the enlarger, so I could do my own enlargements.
You were telling me earlier that you used to be a Saturday boy, Derek Evans. I wonder if you can describe how you met him or came across him and how you came about to be a Saturday boy. And I didn't say this at the beginning, Derek, but I wonder if in your answers you could give them context, because Rick's going to cut me out completely, so dates, names and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, this gentleman that owned the Photographic, when I asked about doing sort of a Saturday job, he had 2 sons who helped him out, so that was no go. So he said, go just down the road, still in Broad Street, just this side of the Green Dragon, go through that door, upstairs above the Women's Institute, and there's a photographer there. Go and talk to him, tell him I have sent you, and introduce yourself. That photographer was Derek Evans. And I don't know why, but he said, yes, you can come in on Saturdays, because I was still at school, and the year would be around about 1957, late 57, 58. And you come in on a Saturday and come and help his father. Derek's father used to go in on odd occasions and sweep the floor, clean the camera lenses, and according to Derek, get in the way a little bit. So I went in, and Derek's father was, I can't remember him very clearly, but he was not, at the time if I remember, not highly active. As a result, having a youngster there, he was more than pleased to stand back and see somebody with some energy and get around and do things. And that really was the start. So yes, Derek did offer me the job, and it was, I don't remember what he paid, but if it was just 2 and 6pence, it was very welcome. But I have no idea how much it was at the time. Possibly some Saturdays I went in because I enjoyed it and didn't expect any remuneration at the time.
So I wonder if you can tell us, if you can, what did the studio look like? What was Derek like? And what sort of jobs you did as a Saturday boy? Were you ever sent out to do a job?
Oh yes. There were times when various things had to be put in the post, obviously. The post office was just down the road. And in the late 1950s, the only way of getting a photograph to Fleet Street in a hurry was through a commercial drum scanner. And the drum scanner, Derek didn't have one. And so I had to sort of put the print into the envelope, and somebody used to come from, whoever did the drum scanning, I remember, come and collect it, and somewhere in Hereford they were scanned and wired to wherever he wanted the pictures to go. Mm.
Do you remember what the studio looked like? I mean, imagine going through the door. You go through the front door on the street.
Yes.
What was it like then, going up? How many flights?
Well, Derek was on the top level of the building, on the south side of the Green Dragon. That's the cathedral end of Broad Street. And he was on the top floor, and below him, clearly remember the Women's Institute, and he had virtually the suite of rooms on the top floor with a window out to Broad Street, and or two windows out into Broad Street. I've got very hazy memories of the layout of the business now, so it's almost impossible to describe what I remember at all.
Was it as a smoke-filled haze? That's what we've been told in the...
Well, yes, Derek did smoke, but when you're a youngster and you're a schoolboy, my father smoked. It's something I didn't really notice. It's strange today. If there's even a slight smell of smoke, I will try and get away from it as far as possible. But then you lived in a smoke environment and you accepted it, and something which I just didn't bother me then at all.
Did he in any way play the role of the mentor or the teacher to you as a young photographer?
My memories of that was not trying to teach you anything. I think, as far as he was concerned, I was a spare pair of hands, and if I could do it and it would save him doing it, that was fine by him. He treated me like a friend, which was rather nice. And as well, he really never in the studio tried to show you how to hold a camera, what to do, or anything. It was a case of, if you're interested, you watch me, and if you're not interested, I don't really want you around. Because I was really interested. He could see that I was probably like an animal. I watched every movement, what he did, the adjustments on the camera, and I'd ask questions, why that? And then he'd explain, rather than him having to say, well, before I do that, I have to do this. So if I didn't understand it, yes, I would ask. But at the time, I was doing it just to try and earn some money. I was interested in photography. But as time went on, and over the months, got to know Derek quite well. I'd go round with him and his father to his father's house, which is, or was then, in the little courtyard off Commercial Street, where Gilbey's is now. And I remember we used to go around there. And sometimes Derek would have a camera, or his 16mm cine camera, and it'd be calling in there en route to do a job somewhere, and he'd call in to see his father, sometimes to pick him up as spare pair of hands, and I'd be there, and I'd carry some of the equipment, obviously, and then one or two jobs, mainly if it was for TV, and the TV channels that I remember he was deeply involved with was the channel in the Midlands called ATV, and the Welsh channel called TWW, Television Wales and the West. And if there are any photographs, still photographs to be taken, sometimes Derek would say, there's the camera, take a photograph. He'd quickly visually check that it was the exposure was about right, and having played around with the cameras in the studio, focusing was becoming sort of second nature. It wasn't a case of play with the cameras as a toy, but to make sure I can understand them. And it was a case of press the button at the right time. And Derek, he never, because he was doing his bit with the 16mm cine, it was left to me to take the pictures. And it wasn't very frequent, but afterwards, after taking a roll of film, you've got to remember that a roll of film then with a Rolleiflex was just 12 exposures, which today on a digital camera, you can take 12 exposures in some cameras in less than half a second. So each exposure was important then. And I'd take probably half a roll of pictures on this rare occasion, and I took some stills. And with a bit of luck, there'd be one or two which were sharp without camera shake, which could be used. So then I realised that, oh, I can do this a little bit better than with the box camera. So the box camera is a very restricted small viewfinder, and with a Rolleiflex finder, it's big, bright, and with the sports viewfinder, it was a direct line of sight, so you could take the photographs very easily. And that was very encouraging when I got back to the studio, and in the dark room, Derek could say, yes, we've got one or two. And that's really made my day, because being able to do that was a hell of a thrill for a youngster. And probably on the occasions, 2 or 3 occasions in a probably 6 months that happened. And probably the most memorable, before I went to university, we went to Belmont Abbey, and he said then that I would have to take some of the still photographs because he would be very busy. It was their celebrations for their centenary. I think that would be just the year I went to university, 1959. And I took still photographs. Derek took a few, obviously, to make sure that there was something there. He couldn't rely on a schoolboy to get photographed with his name on it, because any photograph taken in studio situation is always the principals, and the apprentice is no one. But it's a thrill for the apprentice or a schoolboy to be there anyway. And one of the photographs that I took on that occasion appeared on or in the Times, not Hereford Times, the Times, London. And I've still got in my attic that cutting. It was very special for me to have that first picture in a national paper, whereas the other pictures were more papers which Hereford or something else, which I didn't really follow up so much. But then that I realised then, just before going to university, I'm enjoying this, and that's really what triggered things off.
Did Derek pay for the photograph? What was his response getting, a slot in the Times? Did he say, well done you?
No, I don't know who was his Saturday boy before me, or whoever did the job, if anybody did that job, because he also had, of course, Mike Charity with him at that time. And when I was there, more often than not, it's a weekend, and Mike wasn't always there at weekends. So this is where I was sort of a pair of hands, which was obviously Derek wanted around. And that's more or less sort of one-to-one on occasions, which was great. But Mike Charity, sadly we lost him a couple of years ago now. he and I would often go out on different jobs. And one occasion, we went out towards Hay-on-Wye. I have no memory of what we went to photograph for one very good reason. On the way back, Mike obviously was driving the car, Derek's car, and it was I remember the car, it was a Renault Dauphine, and we were near the Witney Bridge, went around the corner. The road holding of cars then wasn't very good. I think we hit some wet leaves on the road. We skidded and we ended up more or less upside down in the ditch. And from my point of view, sort of, not from speeding, just one of those old-fashioned days, an incident with cars with narrow wheels. We just ended upside down, and we're both scratched and grazed. Somebody rang for an ambulance, so we were brought into Hereford, and we were discharged after the anti-tetanus vaccinations and a quick look over. But what the job was we did on Hay-on-Wye, I don't remember at all.
You talked about Mike. Did you encounter any other photographers at the studio?
No, not really. I remember, say, John Bulmer occasionally visiting Derek. There seemed to be quite a bond and friendship between John and Derek. I don't know what the previous contacts were with John and Derek. That's probably another story altogether. But on the Saturday side of it, and holidays, and it was holidays when you saw more of weekday life. Meeting other photographers was almost non-existent. Hereford Times photographers, probably the only ones we saw, and there was one dear old man who I saw quite frequently, and that his name was Gough Johnson, and he always struck me as, with the camera there, as if he was from another era, like the Victorian era, because he used a bigger camera rather than the smaller Rolleiflex that Derek supplied and used. The big plate camera is just, you think, why is he using that when you can use a roll film camera and take 12 exposures in just a couple of minutes? And he was the Hereford Times photographer, and I think there were a couple of others working for the Hereford Times, but he was certainly in charge of the photographic department at the Hereford Times. When I was at Derek Evans, the whole studio atmosphere was, I was really the background boy and not given the responsibility because I didn't have the experience. So there were no occasions at all where I was asked to go out and take photographs by myself on a job. If that happened, that would be when Derek's assistant, full-time assistant, Michael Charity, would have done that. I'd have loved to have done it, but on the other hand, I don't think I would have been happy taking on that responsibility through a complete lack of inexperience. But very privileged even to be in the studio when, being there, I realised that even then Derek was known internationally with his photography, having had photographs published around the world. And if I remember, the National Geographic magazine had already used his work, and the jazz world had used his photographs, and he had close contacts, I seem to remember, in that sphere.
So it felt like, you did feel like you were working, or a Saturday boy in a studio of some importance?
Oh yes, because he was on the phone time to time discussing various jobs with, as it seems to be the big names in newspapers, and the hierarchy in the two television channels. and as a result, when there were news items for the TV, obviously it had to be cine film, which was sent then often by motorbike courier to be processed, and that really was the number one importance. But when it came to photographs locally, on odd occasions, yes, he was involved, but not. I wasn't involved then.
So this is the late 50s, approaching the 60s. Photography. What was it? What was the atmosphere like in the studio? I mean, was it, you know, hard drinking, smoking? Was it very male?
Yes, because the time in the late 1950s, before I went to university, the people in the studio that usually met up with, obviously Derek's father was in and out, and Mike Charity, and then any other visitors would be more casual visitors then for the times I was there.
So you're thinking about, just one thing, I'm sure you told me, Derek, now, and maybe I dreamt it, but wasn't there an occasion you got locked out of the studio and you had to get in on the roof, via the roof? Am I right in thinking that?
There's a lovely story going around from Derek that in sunny weather, and when it was sort of break time, we'd go out. There's an open window and a sort of a French balcony, and go out there. And Derek's joke was that I'd go out to the onto the balcony, and the window closed, and he assumed that I climbed up onto the Green Dragon and climbed in through a window of the Green Dragon, came back down through a bedroom and through the Green Dragon back to the studio. That was Derek's story and joke, but the element of truth in it's not quite true. I was eventually let back into the studio. But I think Derek told that story for years later. And he even told my receptionist in the surgery that I got locked out and went through somebody's bedroom and went through the dragon. But in reality, no, but it made a lovely story just to have a smile.
You know, thinking about Derek's photographs and his images, where would you place those in, you know, in a social, historical context? Where would you place his photographs?
If I had a look at Derek's photographs and tried to put them into a historical context, at the time, being young, no doubt quite naive, it didn't really associate what he was taking as to be historical. It was just to record now, to go in the press tomorrow, and then thrown away, be done with it. The fact that I was well aware that Derek kept all his negatives and quite a lot of prints, it didn't really register that we have got something which is going to be so much appreciated 50 years on, and it's now getting on to 50 years since I was associated with his business. I was very much a junior part-timer.
So, I mean, we know, you know the stories about the Hereford Times negatives being bulldozed under the Maylord. Do you know about those stories? So that we've lost all that archive.
I was involved with that.
Could you tell us about that?
Got to come forwards to my last year at university, having worked as a freelance part-timer, selling photographs, university news photographs to the London Evening Standard Friday student supplement. I was home for my last 6 months of my university course with no more lectures to go and sit through. I'd finished all my practical work. I'd treated all the patients, got all the necessary marks for that, and had no more practical work to do. So I was able to come back to Hereford and theoretically revise for my final exams. And my parents lived just down the road from where we are now in Lichfield Avenue. They lived just in Brookside with a view over Hereford of the cathedral. And next door neighbour, living at the end of the garden in Lichfield Avenue, was the assistant editor of the Hereford Times. I remember his surname was Mr. Lewis. And you know how neighbours talk at the end of the garden. I used to chat to him, so I had not a lot to do, and told him what I'd been doing in London. He already knew because my parents had told him. And he said, we're short of a photographer. So he offered me a job for a few months at the Hereford Times as a full-time photographer. That's in the days when the Hereford Times, they were in Maylord Street, and the negatives and all the processing and everything was done down in the darkroom. Storeroom was in the cellar. In the cellar there were racks of glass plates, must have gone back maybe to the Victorian years. I never at the time was interested in what was there, but there must have been thousands of negatives and glass plates there. And so I was quite familiar with what was there. And as years later, they had to relocate because Maylord Orchards was developed in the 1984-85 period. They moved out, I would guess, as Maylord's Orchards, I think, were opened in 1985-86, and they relocated to Bath Street, Barrow's house. The archive was not moved, and the stories we hear, the negatives being left behind, are true as far as I know. And bulldozers moved in, and I don't think that the bulk of what was there was taken out. I know one photographer had the copyright of his own negatives, and he if he was there at the time, he would have retrieved them, but generally we lost a lot of Hereford's history. During my last year at university, I had 6 months with my own time just for revision, having completed the university course, practical work. And I was at home back in Hereford, and during the early summer months, I was out in the garden and talked to my parents' next door neighbour, who was assistant editor of the Hereford Times. He had a knowledge of my photographic background as much as my efforts at dentistry, and he asked me if I'd be interested in part-time work, working for the Hereford Times. And that part-time work turned out to be virtually 7 days a week, working odd days to make up 5 days, but it could be Saturdays and Sundays as well to cover fates. Anyway, so I worked for the Hereford Times for a few months just before my finals, and the processing of all the photographic work in the Hereford Times buildings in Maylord Street was down in the cellar. The archive was down in the cellar. The darkroom, I think, was down in the cellar, if I remember. And the stores must have been very extensive and very ancient, possibly going back to the Victorian times. Early 1980s, 84, 85, they had to move out of the building because it was part of the Maylord Orchards redevelopment. So the Hereford Times relocated towards the Barrow's house in Bath Street. They moved into that building. And the photographic archive, the main bulk of it, was left behind in the cellar of the Hereford Times. And they demolished the buildings, and we lost now we realise an enormous amount of our history in photographic form.
The importance of the Derek Evans archive. There's over 200,000 negatives.
Mm. Well, having associated myself with Derek and having known Derek from my schoolboy days, known him after graduation, he was a patient of my predecessors at the dental surgery, which I eventually took over. So I was in contact with Derek and his family and children, and talking to Derek over the years, had a slight insight as to what he had been doing, and then it began to appreciate the importance of what he was doing, the negatives that he had, the subjects that he had photographed. A few cases that I was involved with going out to take photographs. There are other places I went to take photographs with. I think there's a couple of incidents in the book published on Derek Evans called Herefordshire Life. I was actually there, and two of the photographs I may well have taken in the book. So looking back from the present day, we are just so fortunate that Derek kept his negatives. He virtually kept an index of the negatives. Fortunately, they were all mainly on roll film, which is not like the thick glass plates, which take a lot of, they're heavy and they take a lot of space. And they were able to be just kept on the side. And now we look back and see, I went with Derek to some of the Fownhope parades and other events. Went to one or two football matches with Derek, mainly to carry his equipment to the football matches, because he was a very, very sharp photographer, as we realised, and then we appreciated. And only now do I realise that we have got an enormous amount of valuable historical material. Yes, I went out with Derek on one photographic expedition to the Green Man at Fownhope, and the Green Man had some renovation works done. They had a large ballroom, and it may have been fairly newly built, but more importantly, we went out to photograph a local artist painting a huge mural on the wall, and the artist was Trevor Makerson, and he was at the time painting famous Fownhope boxer Tom Spring, and I clearly remember then taking a few still pictures, and I think one of my pictures did go into print somewhere. Going with Derek and photographing Trevor Makerson just for the camera, I can show that the camera, and the Green Man on the mural is also a local court, so we've got pictures of the judges, but I was more important to me more important was the local boxer, Tom Spring, who was a national champion boxer, and got to think of it as a boxer from the days when I think they were bare-fisted boxers, not with softer gloves on their fists, so he was quite a famous champion, but more importantly, Derek took the film for TV of this artist working.
Sorry, Derek, would you mind showing the camera the book again, please?
Yes, yes, we've got a picture of Trevor Makerson, and both on the left side is Trevor at Green Man Fownhope, on the right hand side Trevor at Three Counties Hotel, top of Elstone Hill. The building has now been demolished. I just wonder if we can find the tractor one. It was one of the oldest tractors in England, and we went down to Simmons Yachts, Whitchurch, and then on the screen here, clearly pictures of horse ploughing competitions, and I did go with Derek to, I think, 2 places. I think they're more agricultural fairs where they're cart horses doing demonstration ploughing rather than ploughing competitions. And I clearly was with Derek there as his assistant and admiring his technique but not taking any photographs. So seeing a photograph of a ploughing horse brings back memories. And also going on to fields agricultural shows which my parents were not the slightest bit interested in. So for me it was the start of a lifetime experience. Pictures of the Fownhope parades. I only remember going, I think, just on one occasion to one of the Fownhope parades, and Derek was then, when I went, taking mainly still photographs. So I think and hope that there are a lot of still photographs in the archive of this unique event, because in the old days the local farming community, from a photographer's point of view, I could see that they were real characters and they just had to be recorded. And when I got back to the studio and I could see Derek's prints afterwards, it was just, I couldn't believe that on a single photograph he could take a picture of one of these local people, and on the photograph you could read their character. He captured them just that split second, and that's the sort of photography that appealed to me. Something you see and then some people think, oh, I wish I'd had a camera, I wish I'd captured that. That something is something that seems to be in my system, and to this day when I take photographs I press the trigger, even with a digital camera, and if in the rare occasion I use the fast drive. It's from Derek Evans' days, when capturing that moment, I just somehow, I think, I've got that lucky shot, and it seems to happen quite frequently. And it's just, to me, it's weird, and I think, why does it happen? I can't explain it. It's just one of those things. Now, the photographs of the hop yards. I never went to photograph hops with Derek. I used to go to school in Ledbury from Hereford by bus every day. That was to the grammar school in Ledbury. Used to drive through Dormington past the hop yards there, and they used to see the gypsy encampments and all the characters, and it was passing then, before I took photographs, I had the feeling, there's a subconscious feeling, there's something there to be recorded, which at the time I didn't realise was there, and something there again. It's in my system, and it's developed over the years since then, an interest in the history of Hereford. And none of the pictures on screen are studio pictures. He's had to take the photograph with the available lighting. He's in front of a character more often than not he didn't know. And Derek's own personality, in just a few words, could obviously bring out the best of who he's talking to. And without so many pictures he took, the subject's not camera shy. And you look at the pictures, and there are a lot now in the books and on here. You can see that there's nobody sort of sitting stiff and like a soldier, rigid, sort of ready for a photograph. They're just in their natural environment. And Derek seemed to have that sort of invisible contact. There's that magic touch to be able to put the person at ease, take a photograph. He was in the right place for the lighting for many occasions. Subconsciously, he would move around a subject so the light would bring out the best of the person's features. Taking pictures in bright sunshine is an art of its own. And when I look back at some of Derek's pictures and see that the lighting in a lot of the photographs is just perfect, as if he'd thought about it for an hour and arranged it. And no, the few occasions I've been with him, it's instinctive to him to be in the right position, move around, take the pictures, and the subject quite often was unaware that he had taken the photographs. Yes, you can see how the clouds, the way they're lit up. In the studio, there'd be no doubt a bit of enhancement. You can't do in the old-fashioned wet darkroom. You can't do what you do on a computer nowadays. And to be able to enhance the clouds and get the horse as a darker shadow, as a silhouette there, it's quite a skillful process to be able to do this with the old black and white wet process. And this is something which you can look at it and you don't realise what's gone on behind the scenes. And that's one of Derek's skills, is to be able to print something in the darkroom, and then you go through all the chemical processes and you end up with something which is, in this case, undoubtedly could be an award-winning photograph in any exhibition. Yeah, there's the Heart of Oak, yes. There again, we've got some photograph taken in Fownhope, and it's the Heart of Oak procession. Derek's taken this photograph with a subject that not any camera shyness. You can see that the character of this gentleman, and you can see the features of his face, the lighting and the way that's exposed is first class. And then to be able to get black and white prints and to be able to enlarge it to exhibition standards, that is the skill that Derek had. That's to be admired. Yes, I've homed in on a picture taken. It looks like we've got gentleman's holding part of a hop vine, so he's in the hop field. He may well be part of the Romany community, and I know Derek was in close contact with the hop yards at Dormington, possibly Claston Farm. I don't know this occasion, but that's a guess. But when you look at the photograph and see that, once again, there's quite a bright sunlight to the right of this photograph and to this gentleman's left-hand face. Derek's got the exposure spot on to show the shadow detail. He's captured everything you could dream of to show one of these rural characters. I quite admire it. He, more often than not, I think he just went sort of by himself with a camera and a bag. But when I went, just as a spare pair of arms to carry the extra cameras, no doubt. So, and his instinct again, top on one, a photograph of a football match, a match which I would have no idea what's going on, but I'll hold this towards the camera and you can see how he's captured a photograph of a football match. And even this day and age with modern cameras, to get a photograph just with the ball in the position like that, to do that with a roll film camera, I think is due credit to the skill of Derek Evans. It's got everything a modern photographer could wish for, and if that was in colour, it would be even wow. But of course, then to take sports photographs and to look at this, it's a very sharp photograph, and that indicates that it would have been a very high shutter speed to capture somebody in mid-air. There's you can see the one footballer, he's a foot off the ground or more, and that's the maximum shutter speed for the camera. If it's a Rolleiflex, it's a 500th of a second, and you can only press it once for that particular sort of football episode. You just got to click once, otherwise you miss it. But it's that click once, and it's, to me, it's a millionth of a second exposure just right. And he did that so often. Now I've homed in on a photograph of the old house, and looks like a vintage car meeting, a photograph taken from upstairs in one of the shops, probably Augustus Edwards, which today Augustus Edwards would be one of the shops which was gutted by fire, and it's still at the site of that extensive fire in Hightown. And not only is this of interest to, no doubt, the vintage car enthusiasts, but it's yet another historical record of Hereford. You can see a view into Commercial Street. He's captured a moment in time. And because Derek Evans is Hereford, to see a photograph of Hereford taken by Derek, and hopefully from his archive, we might have a date that was taken. We'll know more. But to me, that historically is as good as you're going to get, and no doubt there'll be more. I've homed in on a Mayfair photograph. I've taken many Mayfair photographs, and this one, it is, I think it's very special. It's a picture which I don't think could be reproduced unless you had hired a crane. I think it was taken from the top of a helter-skelter to get that angle of view, and it might be a one-off, I don't know, because there's just no way is it physically possible to find that viewpoint. And from a photographer's point of view, that is the dream position. It is. It is. It just gives the whole story. It gives you, to anybody looking at the photograph, it just gives you the atmosphere of the Mayfair, the lights. It's an evening photograph, and an evening photograph to show the detail as well. It's another skill, Derek's skill, and this is recorded for posterity. It's another clear image of Derek's. I think the Derek Evans archive is a gem. One reason, because I personally have been involved, albeit a long time ago, and maybe a little bit remotely, because I was never a proper employee, but treated more like a friend in many respects. And then we look forward to today, what have we got from the days when Derek was taking the photographs? We've got recorded history. We've got Derek recorded as a skillful photographer with an instinct second to none in photography, to be at the right place, the right time, the angle right, just to press the camera shutter button at the right time. And what is important for the future is now to get some memories of what it was like in the old days, how photographs were taken then, and even today people don't realise just what it was like to take photographs with the older cameras. And when we see Derek's archive, I think that really the conditions were relatively primitive to what you can use today. You can take a telephone, mobile phone out of your pocket, you can take some photographs and put it away without thinking twice. Then you had a bulky instrument which you had to carry around, you had to service it, keep it clean, know how to use it, because there's very little that's automated about it. You had to be in charge of everything, the exposure, the focusing. And the future generations, unless somebody will explain to them what went on, they won't appreciate it. And then to see what's been preserved in the history of the area, and further afield, because Derek did go further afield as well. He photographed the Aberfan mudslide disaster in South Wales. There are obviously lots of other photographers involved there, but for us it's Derek's view of it. I think he went shortly after the horrendous incident. And for other things as well, historically, it's a brilliant archive. And the fact that we're able to do this, we've got the backing to do it, I think that it's going to be a valuable contribution to what has been done and to preserve things for the future.